On January 18th, 1971, in Saitama, Misato, Japan, which is a little more than a half-hour drive from Tokyo, was born a beautiful little girl named Junko Furuta. She arrived to both loving parents and an older brother, and later came her little brother. For the most part, Junko grew up as a normal little girl in a normal household. She went to school, had plenty of friends, got good grades, super pretty, and popular. Now, as I was researching what life was like for young teens in Japan high schools, even back in the 80s, it really wasn't that different from what we're familiar with here in the States. Over there, you still have your bad influences, the bullies, the quote-unquote thugs, the class clowns, etc. But Junko's parents were happy to know that their daughter followed her own path at Yashio Minami High School and didn't fall into the crowd of the drinking, drugging, smoking, cutting school, and partying teenagers. Instead, she focused on her schoolwork, and as of October 1988, she even worked part-time at a plastic molding factory after school so she could help her family financially and save up money for her senior graduation trip she was so excited about going on. She even had a job lined up for her to start after graduation at an electronics retailer and had plans on pursuing her dreams of becoming an idol singer. Junko was focused, and despite not succumbing to the peer pressure surrounding her, she still was able to maintain her popularity in school, which made the bad seed students pretty jealous of her. The fake gangsters of the school couldn't stand this goody two-shoe girl who seemed to garner all this attention by just being pretty and really just a wholesome kind of girl. One boy specifically, who swore he was affiliated with the Yakuza's gang, which is one of Japan's most notable dangerous gangs, pretty much like the mob, felt like she was a lame, but he also had a crush on her regardless to her cookie-cut image, so he felt obligated to try and get her attention for himself. His name is Hiroshi Minayo, and he was 18 years old at the time. Now, Hiroshi had a crummy background. He had been problematic since elementary school. He would commit crimes like shoplifting, damaging school property, and in April of 1986, he was enrolled in a private high school in Tokyo, but he dropped out in 1987 and then attended the same school as Junko. His crime spree didn't stop. In fact, it just escalated as he became associated with the Yakuza gang and began committing sex crimes. He used to work as a tile worker to save up money so he could marry his girlfriend, who was one of his friend's older sisters, but the job didn't pay enough, so he committed more crimes with the Yakuzas to make money. Once his girlfriend learned of his sexual deviance and gang affiliation, she left him. So Hiroshi turned his focus on to Junko. I told you he developed a crush for her, but he wasn't interested in getting to know Junko more. He wasn't interested in taking her on a cute little high school teenage date. He wanted to sexually dominate her. So he made his pass at her and asked her to engage with him sexually, and of course Junko refused, to where Hiroshi became enraged but didn't let Junko know of his disdain because he had his own sinister plans lined up for Junko. Her refusal of his advances was the climax of her life from that day forward. You see, Hiroshi was not used to being told no or being turned down or being rejected. He was the biggest bully of their school. He used his affiliation with the Yakuzas to muscle his way around. Nobody refused anything Hiroshi told them or asked for. So who was Junko to refuse his advances? Well, a few days later, after Junko's refusal on Friday, the 25th of November 1988, Hiroshi and his friend 16-year-old Minato had found themselves roaming around the town of Misato looking for young girls to rape and rob. Yes, this is something they normally did. As a matter of fact, just a few weeks before, they had raped and robbed a young girl whom they allowed to go free when they were done with her. Unfortunately, fate had it that around 8:30 p.m., they just so happened to have seen Junko riding on her bike on her way home from work, but she didn't see them. This is when Hiroshi hatches the plan to lure her into his clutches. Under Hiroshi's orders, Shinji makes his way towards Junko and violently kicks her right off her bike. Hiroshi, who was pretending to just so happen to be around, coincidentally runs up on Shinji, pretending to scare him away under the guise of being some sort of fake hero. Shinji takes off on foot so Hiroshi can make his move. Hiroshi acts like he's willing to walk her home safely, and Junko, although knew Hiroshi wasn't to be trusted, didn't have any real reason to believe that he would try to hurt her. She didn't even have any idea that he was harboring any hatred for her, and that was the last time Junko ever saw her loved ones again. Hiroshi lured Junko to an abandoned building where he intimidated Junko, telling her of his connections to the Yakuzas, and began brutally raping her. He told her if she even made a peep, he would kill her and have her family murdered as well. He then took her to a hotel where he continued to rape her over and over. Then he called his friends, Minato, Joe Ogura, and Yasushi, who is the brother of Hiroshi's ex-girlfriend that I mentioned earlier, to brag to them about what he'd done to Junko. Joe Ogura asked Hiroshi to keep her captive so they too can get a turn at raping Junko. At around 3 a.m., Hiroshi brought Junko to a nearby park where all his friends were waiting, and they all took turns in raping Junko, one after the other. The group of boys learned of Junko's exact address when they saw it in one of her school books, so they threatened her again that if she tried to escape, they'd send Yakuza gang members to her family's home and kill them, instilling fear in her to better their chances at subduing her and eliminating the option of running off. Fearful that Junko may tell police what happened to her, they all collectively brought her to the home owned by Minato's parents in the Ayase district of Adachi, Tokyo, which is about a 15-minute drive from Junko's home. And side note, if I'm butchering any of these names, please forgive me. Minato's parents' home was their regular hangout spot and where the Yakuza gang would meet up. Minato's parents were under the assumption that Junko was one of his friend's girlfriends at first, but they later learned that wasn't the case at all. And no, they didn't intervene with what was to come next because they were actually afraid of Minato and his friends. Yes, his parents were fearful of their own son, as over the years, Minato increasingly became violent towards them. They lost control of Minato and they were very afraid of what he was capable of, especially as an affiliate of the Yakuza's gang. So they found themselves minding their own business as their son and his goonies took turns again, raping her repeatedly. Again, this was the start of their 44-day torturous marathon. Warning, from this point forward in this video, I will be describing some of the most heinous, graphic, violent, gory details I've ever described in my journey telling victim stories. So if you are squeamish, if you are sensitive to this content, I ask you to please turn the video off now. Now, while all this was happening to Junko since Friday night, her parents, of course, had been blanketed with worry and fear that their only daughter had gone missing. So they contacted the authorities Sunday, November 27th, 1988, for assistance with their daughter's disappearance. The four friends knew authorities would be looking for Junko, so they made her contact her parents, pretending to be okay. She was told to call her parents and tell them that she was safe and that they didn't need to worry and she was staying with a friend. Of course, Junko complied, unaware of their future plans with her. She asked her parents to lay off the investigation because she wasn't missing. Once they realized the coast was clear, the boys continued to keep her captive in the bedroom while severely and brutally beating on Junko and using her as their personal sperm dump, raping her repeatedly. The boys took so much pride in the agonizing abuse that they inflicted on Junko that they bragged about it to their friends and gang affiliates like it was some sort of feat they had won. In fact, they were so excited about their defenseless victim, they invited even more guys to come over and do the same thing to Junko. It was a Monday night, November 28th, 1988, when Hiroshi told a couple of his buddies to come over and see what was going on. So they came over and went to the room upstairs where Junko was sitting, wearing a long sleeve t-shirt and a skirt that Hiroshi had stolen from the clothing store a couple days before. The teens sat around drinking cough syrup, acting stupid, pretending to be high out of their minds, when Junko made a sudden move and tried to escape the room. She began screaming bloody murder, trying to make her way out, when Hiroshi snatched her and Koichi put a pillow over her head to muffle her screams. Minato's parents heard the screams and went to the room to see what was going on, but the boys told them everything was fine. Knowing everything wasn't fine, but in fear, Minato's parents retreated back to minding their business. This costed Junko any peace she imagined she'd be able to get that night. As for punishment, the boys took turns brutally raping Junko. During the rapes, Junko had an outer body experience and just went unconscious, laying there with her eyes open, not blinking, just in a state of shock. At this time, a few dozen boys were invited over to see the spectacle of Junko. Even a girl came over to see what was being talked about and thought it'd be fun to use Junko's face as a coloring book by drawing all over her. She was humiliated daily, being forced to stay naked, forced to strip and masturbate in front of the visitors, and beaten to a pulp daily. The crew of boys who had her captive would shove her into a freezer, make her suffer in the icy cold temperatures, and take her back out whenever they were ready to rape her again. They took such joy in forcing themselves into her vaginally and anally. Minato's brothers was becoming concerned with Junko's physical state, warning his brother that she may soon have been ready to die if they kept at it. But Minato and the rest of the crew didn't care. Junko was beaten so severely that blood had accumulated into her nasal cavities and she couldn't even breathe through her nose. They would take weights and drop them onto her stomach for fun, which caused her to lose all control of her bowels. Her organs had started to give in to where her stomach couldn't hold any food or beverage, which led to extreme dehydration. So when she tried to eat or drink anything that they gave her, she'd immediately throw it all up, which only pissed the monsters off even more because there's vomit on the floor that needed to be cleaned up. So of course they'd beat her mercilessly as punishment. Junko was so weak, the boys were able to gather her up, tied her hands to the ceiling, and then used her body as their own personal punching bag. They also began forcing her to eat cockroaches and drink her own urine, and if she threw it up, she would get another grave beating. They took turns in burning her skin with cigarette lighters, leaving her with massive burn scars scattered all over her body. Another form of torture inflicted onto Junko was making her sleep on the balcony during the coldest nights of winter with below zero freezing temps, with no clothes, no sheets, no blankets, nothing to keep her warm. They would make her lay on the concrete, face on the ground, so they could take turns in jumping and stomping on her head, one demon after the other. Now, one of the boys who was a spectator of what was happening to Junko had gone home and told his brother what was going on at Minato's home. The brother, who clearly had a moral compass, decided to call the police and sent them to the home. This surely had to finally have been Junko's saving grace, right? Unfortunately, no. When police arrived, Minato's parents answered the door and the police asked them about what was going on and told them about the call they received. Minato's parents lied to the police and told them there wasn't a little girl staying in their home and they don't know why a call like that was made. Instead of the police asking to take a look around, they just left. They took Minato's parents' word as bond and simply left, just like that. There was another moment where after a night of drinking, the demons had fallen asleep and Junko saw this as an opportunity to finally get some help. So she went and found a phone in the house and called the police. But unfortunately, she was caught. Before she could say anything, Hiroshi snatched the phone from her, put his ear to the phone, told police the call was a mistake, and hung up. This only further fueled the rage of these monsters, so they punished her by pouring lighter fluid on her legs and feet and setting her on fire, burning her flesh. Junko started having convulsions, but this didn't faze the boys. They laughed it off. I'm not even sure how Junko was able to survive that ordeal, but she did end up asking them to just please kill her and get it over with. Take her out of her misery, but that would have taken the fun out of watching her suffer. So they decided on holding off on murdering her at that point. They took their sadism up an extra notch and sodomized her with large glass bottles and beat her legs with bamboo sticks so badly to the point her muscles were severely damaged and she lost the ability to properly walk. A few weeks into Junko's hellish nightmare, around 20 days in, the devils had found new ways to torment her. They took dumbbells and smashed her hands to the point all the bones in her hands and fingers were broken and her fingernails were crushed. She couldn't even hold a piece of paper in her hands if she wanted to. Junko was unable to urinate properly as a result of having sharp, jagged objects inserted into her vagina and into her anus as well. These objects included scissors, grilled chicken skewers, roasting needles, lit cigarettes which they used to burn her clitoris with, lighters, and iron bars, leaving her shredded internally, causing massive bleeding. Also inserted into her were lit fireworks. Fireworks were placed inside of Junko and lit up, not just vaginally and anally, but into her ears and mouth as well, damaging her eardrums to the point where she almost couldn't hear and causing brain atrophy. Junko's body was so weak from all the damage that it took her over an hour just to crawl to the bathroom from the bedroom where she was held captive. The iron rods that was used to sodomize Junko with was also used to beat on her with, as well as golf clubs. Junko's appearance had clearly deteriorated at this point, causing Satan's spawns to find her unattractive, so they found themselves going outside to find themselves new prey to make victims. Junko Furuta was raped a total of about 500 times during this entire 44-day ordeal by more than 100 men and boys. If you average it out, that's approximately 9 to 10 times of being raped each day that she was in that room, including one day where she was raped 12 times by 12 different males, some of them even urinating on her. Lucifer's sons continued to beat on her daily with various objects. They would take hot wax and pour it onto Junko's face, focusing only on allowing it to drip over her eyes. They would also take lit cigarettes and burn her eyelids with the cigarettes, and then use the flame from the lighters to burn her eyelids as well. They took little sewing needles to stab her in the breast with, and would only take some of the needles out. Her left breast was destroyed as they used pliers to rip off her left nipple. Light bulbs would be unscrewed and, while still hot, were inserted into her vagina, which they wriggled inside of her until the light bulb exploded inside of her. Due to all the damage done to her body, Junko bled out from her genitals continuously, and a foul stench began to form from her rotted flesh. On January 1st, 1989, Junko spent the day alone, unable to move, body mutilated, wishing and begging to just be killed already. A few days later, on January 4th, the residents of Hell had forced Junko to play a game of Mahjong Solitaire, a tile-based game originated in China. As weak as she still was able to beat them at the game, and predictably, this infuriated the sadists. So yes, Junko had to pay for this in blood. They grabbed an iron barbell and brutally beat her on her already feeble body. They then took lighter fluid and poured it over her feet, her arms, her face, her legs, her stomach, and her chest. Placed a lit candle to her face and set her ablaze. This went on for a total of 2 hours. Already brittle, weak, dehydrated, and malnourished, Junko went into shock and finally passed away later that day. Now, normally, I would say that a death is unfortunate. However, in this case, while doing research, I found myself also begging for her death to come sooner than it did. She went through way too much suffering. When Junko passed away, she was at the house alone. Minato's brother found her dead, and I believe Minato was at one of his friend's house when his brother called him to inform him that Junko had passed away. The thugs started freaking out and all came rushing back to the house to confirm what they were told. Once they realized she was really gone, they took her body, wrapped it up in blankets, shoved her into a travel bag, and placed her into a 55-gallon drum and filled it up to the top with cement, attempting to conceal her lifeless body. However, what they didn't realize was that strands of Junko's hair was sticking out at the top of the cement, which ended up standing out after the cement dried. They ended up taking the container to Koto, Tokyo, and leaving Junko's body in a dump truck at a construction site. Now, remember I told you earlier how at one point the boys became turned off by Junko's appearance after all the abuse she endured, so they went out raping other young girls? Well, on January 23rd, 1989, Hiroshi and Joe Ogura was arrested for the gang rape of that girl. And while in custody, police had searched the home of these animals and found pennies. So a couple months later, on March 29th, officers were interrogating them about what they found to see if they'd give them any information on more victims. But during the interrogation, Hiroshi's stupid ass thought that he was being asked about Junko's murder. He thought Joe Ogura had already spilled the beans. But the police wasn't asking about Junko, they was asking about somebody else. But being that Hiroshi is so dumb, he jumped the gun and started confessing, telling everything, including where Junko's body could be found, which I'm glad that he was that stupid. Police became confused because they had no idea about what happened to Junko. They were questioning Hiroshi about another girl and her 7-year-old son that was murdered. So basically, these idiots absolutely could have gotten away with what they done, but by the grace of the Most High, Hiroshi was so stupid and ended up telling everything detail for detail. So with this new information, police were able to find the container holding Junko's body the next day. Her fingerprints had to be used to confirm her identity because her face was unrecognizable. And on April 1st, 1989, Joe Ogura was arrested for a different sexual assault and then rearrested for Junko's murder. Soon after, Yasushi, Minato, and Minato's brother were also arrested. Several other of the demons who played a role in Junko's torturous death, including Tetsuo and Kyochi, were identified and charged with rape after their DNA was found inside of Junko. The container that Junko was heartlessly stuffed in was finally broken open, revealing a horrific sight of her decrepit body. When Junko's mother learned all of what happened to her daughter, she passed out. The details caused her to faint and then spend a long stint in a psychiatric hospital. An autopsy was conducted. Small bottles were discovered still stuck in her rectal cavity, and one of the 100 men who abused her had actually impregnated her. Now, the Japanese court had decided to keep the identities of the 4 main offenders who kidnapped, beat, raped, and tortured Junko sealed, as they were what to be considered as minors at the time of the heinous crime. However, journalists from the Shukan Bunshun magazine did their digging and found out each of their names and revealed them to the public. Their reasoning was, after what they all did to Junko, they didn't deserve to have any human rights upheld on their behalf, and I firmly concur. Unfortunately, being that these guys were all considered to be juveniles when they brought hell on earth, they were tried as juveniles, yet convicted as adults, and received what I believe to be a light sentencing. All 4 defendants pled guilty to committing bodily injury that resulted in death instead of murder. In July of 1990, 18-year-old Hiroshi was sentenced to 17 years. He appealed it, but was given an additional 3 years by Tokyo High Court Judge Ryuji Yanase, making it a 20-year sentence in total. A 20-year sentence is the second longest sentence before life imprisonment. Joe Ogura, who was 18 at the time, was sentenced to 8 years in juvenile prison. Minato, who was 16, and Yasushi, who was 17, both received 5 to 7 year sentences that were extended an extra 2 years. Minato's parents and brother were not charged for enabling the monster they lived with. When Minato was released, He moved into a home with his mother. However, in 2018, Minato was arrested again for the attempted murder of a 32-year-old man after beating him with a metal rod and slashing his throat with a knife. Joe Ugura was released in August of 1999. Upon his release, he was said to have been boasting and bragging about what he and his comrades did to Junko. In July 2004, he was also arrested again for the assault of his friend. Joe Ugura felt like Takatoshi was trying to steal his girlfriend from him, so he went looking for him, and when he found him, he beat him with an iron pipe and shoved him into his truck. Joe Ugura drove Takatoshi from Adachi to his mother's bar in Misato, where he beat Takatoshi for several hours. And it was said that Joe Ugura repeatedly threatened to kill Takatoshi, telling him that he had killed before and knew how to get away with it. Joe Ugura was sentenced to 7 years in prison and has since been released. Hiroshi went in front of a parole board in 2004 but was denied. He eventually was released from prison in 2009. In January of 2013, Hiroshi was arrested on a fraud charge, but due to insufficient evidence, he was released without charge later that month. He reportedly continued his gang activities after being released. Now, of course, Junko's parents were horrified by the light sentences that were handed to these monsters and filed a civil suit against Minato's family and won. The family was ordered to pay Junko's parents 50 million yen, which is equivalent to 425,000 US dollars. However, I read that Junko's parents hadn't even received that money, and instead, Minato's family gave the money they had from selling their house to the criminals, and they used it to party and bullshit. What's crazy is it's been said that one of these turds' mothers actually vandalized Junko's grave, stating, quote, "The dead girl had ruined her son's life," end quote. Disgusting. Citizens of the public were also outraged by the sentencing and made phone calls and penned letters about the injustice of the sentences that was served to the Tokyo District Court and prosecutor's office. They demanded the death penalty, but of course, their voices were ignored. Junko's funeral was held on April 2nd, 1989. Her planned future employer gifted her parents with the uniform Junko would have worn for the job she was going to work. The uniform was put in her casket. At her graduation, Junko's school principal presented her a high school diploma, which was given to her parents. The location near where Junko's body was discovered has been developed since and is now Wakasu Park. Junko's story has inspired several books and movies that you can easily find with a quick Google search. Now, during my research, I read that people who heard of this story thought it was a hoax. People thought this entire ordeal was made up. However, the unfortunate raw truth is that this actually happened. This is all real. I wish it wasn't, though. I can't even describe the feelings that I've had researching the details of the story. I had to stop a couple times and take a deep breath to keep going. And when I first heard about this story, I couldn't even listen to the whole thing straight through. I had to keep stopping and going, stopping and going. And this is absolutely the most horrendous story I've ever done thus far. I've heard some disturbing stories, but this one specifically was just outlandish in the worst way. The sadism overload of these devils, I can't even wrap my mind around how or why anyone could be so evil. That includes the people who came to see what happened and didn't do anything about it. The people who took part in raping her. The parents who owned the home she stayed in. Everybody involved will absolutely have to be judged by the Most High. And when that time comes, I doubt they'll be offered a seat behind the pearly gates. As of 2023, there are no updates on where any of these people are in the world today. I hate that Junko had to suffer for more than a month the way she did. I hate that she didn't get to graduate. I hate that she didn't get to work that new job. It was also said that the night she was on her way home, she was so excited about catching one of those popular talent shows on TV back then, and she expressed how regretful she was that she didn't get to see it while she was being violated. Minato placed a taping of the show in the container with her because he said he didn't want her to come back and haunt him. Wow. Junko died just 10 days before her 18th birthday. She died for no reason, for being pretty and popular. She was targeted by evil. Stories like these make me want to question the powers that be. I just can't understand. Rest in peace, beautiful Junko. Your story will never be forgotten.